Hello and welcome to the live broadcast of the Central Bank's monetary policy statement, which will be presented by the Governor of the Central Bank, Majosi Sithole. Is going to be doing that at about 25 minutes to 9, which means we have just about 6 minutes to sort of get you to understand what this is. In the studio, I have with me the Central Bank Deputy Governor, Felicia Dlamini. She's also accompanied by the General Manager of Financial Markets from the Central Bank. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming through and affording us the opportunity to broadcast this live. Yeah.
Thank you.
Morning and thank you.
I think this is one of the benefits of COVID-19. For the first time, we're actually having this live, and it's very important. But first of all, before we even get to that, Dlamini, maybe you could explain to us or give us a broad explanation of what the central bank really does and why it's important for all of us.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, and it's a privilege to be here. COVID-19 has given us the opportunity to think outside the box, and maybe going forward we'll have these sessions more regularly.
Yeah.
Every time we have the governor present his policy statement, Eswatini TV might want to cover it live.
Yeah.
Having said that, the central bank is broadly tasked with formulating and implementing monetary policy to support price stability and stable financial systems. So you would recall that there are two policies that support the economy. There's the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. So it's like two sides of a coin. So the central bank focuses more on the monetary formulation and implementation.
Mm-hmm. So basically, this is what we are about today, the monetary policy. As I said earlier on, the governor of the central bank is going to be presenting that live right here on Eswatini TV this morning at about 25 minutes to 9. So let's understand what the monetary policy is and maybe how it influences me as an individual or some of the decisions that I take as an individual.
Okay, well, thanks for the question. Maybe just briefly in a nutshell, I think what normally the public would see as the key outcome of a monetary policy decision would be the interest rate, which would be announced every time the monetary policy committee has actually met. And that is actually the ultimate policy tool that we use. Generally, the interest rate represents the cost of capital, which means that if interest rates move up and down, it actually influences business decisions. I mean, for you as an individual, it also affects the cost of credit. Mm-hmm. Like you might have seen, I think, in the past couple of months or so, the central bank actually reduced interest rates, and the ultimate objective of that is to make credit easily available, such that people can actually go to borrow to boost economic activity. So I think that is one of the fundamental tools, I think.
Yes. Okay, that's one of the fundamental tools.
A little bit, we monetary policy focuses on the demand side. Mm-hmm. So if the cost of capital is cheaper, then you would want, as a consumer, you would be spending more because you can borrow and invest or consume.
And you are borrowing it in an affordable
rate. Whereas if it's expensive, then you think about whether you want to purchase that new car or not. Mm-hmm. So it drives demand and economic activity from the demand side.
Okay. This rate, the interest rate, oftentimes a lot of people say, why is it always that if South Africa makes any announcement around their adjustments and as far as the interest rate is concerned, you find that pretty much the same will prevail this side? Has it to do with the fact that we are pegged to the rand in terms of our currency?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned that we have the interest rate, mm-hmm. and then we also have the exchange rate.
Okay.
So in the case of Eswatini, the exchange rate, our lilangeni, is pegged 1-to-1 to the rand. So we monitor closely what happens to the anchor currency, which is South Africa. So whenever there's a movement, we sit and we look at how that movement affects the peg. And if there's a reaction, we then would act. So we do not want to maintain too much of a differential because it affects the peg.
Okay, so it affects the pegging of. Now, 2020 obviously is a special year, and that's the way things have happened. Pretty much everything has come to a standstill. Maybe to get a sense of whether or not some of these things or some of the happenings le 2020 could have an influence on the speech that Deputy Governor Namuhla. Governor, sorry. I don't know. It's because I have you. I'm so sorry. It's because I have you in the studio with me. Yeah.
Well, yes, obviously. I think 2020 so far has been quite an eventful year. And mainly with regards to developments I think around the coronavirus or COVID-19, which, as we all know, I think it has actually changed the outlook for the performance of the global economy, including our own economy. The governor will probably allude to that in the sense that there are some policy initiatives that the central bank has actually taken in order to try and mitigate some of the negative impacts of COVID-19 on the economy. But having said that as well, I think it is also important to note that we are still in the midst of COVID-19. It is anyone's guess as to when we'll actually get through this. But as you rightly pointed out, no one actually knew what was going to happen this year. But it's a challenge that we were all facing.
Live videos of images from the event where the deputy or the governor, I don't know why I keep making that mistake, but yes, the governor is going to be making his address in about say maybe under 5 minutes, because he was supposed to have actually done that at 25 minutes to 9. It's 24 minutes to 9, so any moment now we will be crossing over to the event at the Happy Valley, is
Royal Villas.
Royal Villas. Okay. Yeah, Royal Villas. Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of the other instruments that influence the monetary policy. We spoke of the discount rate. Maybe that's the interest rate. What are the other instruments that sort of influence this monetary policy in the country?
The other instruments are the prudential ratios, like the reserve requirement, like the liquidity requirement. So the liquidity requirement determines how much banks should hold in terms of liquidity and how much they can disperse in terms of in loans.
Okay.
The reserve requirement does a similar thing, but it cushions the commercial banks' reserves so that they have some buffer capital in case of emergency. So we have set it at a minimum of 8%, which is more or less in line with international best practice. And we adjust that depending on how the economy is evolving and how much liquidity we need to inject into the system or how much we need to mop up. The other instruments Melvin will talk to.
Maybe let's get a bit into these two that you made mention of, the reserve requirement as well as the liquidity thingy, the liquidity requirement, and how these because you were talking about how you then decide how much can be released for circulation and how much needs to be reserved. Maybe one needs to understand why you would have to make decisions around those things and what sort of an impact whatever decision you make has on the economic activity in the country. Let's start with the liquidity requirement, for instance.
Okay. as the Deputy Governor indicated, according to legislation, they need to deposit a portion of that with the Central Bank, and also they need to hold securities.
Assistant Governor, who's going to make his welcome remarks and also introduce the Governor. Thank you very much.
Program Director, Honorable Minister for Finance, Members of Parliament present here, Board of Directors of the Central Bank, members of the Monetary Policy Consultative Committee, CEOs of commercial banks and non-financial institutions, CEOs of private sector and public enterprises, representatives for international organizations, representatives for non-governmental organizations, representatives of the academia, senior government officials, central bank management and staff, representatives of all media houses, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. On behalf of the Central Bank of Eswatini, may I take this opportunity to welcome you all to the 2019-2020 Governor's Annual Monetary Policy Statement. Ladies and gentlemen, in line with the bank's mandate of ensuring price and financial stability, the Governor's address this morning shall mainly be on economic developments, the bank's operations and the monetary policy stance taken by the bank over the period that we are reporting on. The Governor will also present on the monetary policy outlook for the year 2020-2021 to guide investors and the business community. Program Director, my task is basically to introduce the Governor as he takes the podium to deliver his speech. Before I do so, allow me to point out that the year 2019-2020 has been a very difficult year globally, especially the first quarter of 2020, in which we saw the heightened negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The uncertainty around the trajectory of this pandemic The uncertainty of the trajectory of this pandemic, for example, recently we learned of the resurgence of cases in Beijing, China, when all of us had thought that China had conquered the pandemic. So there is still uncertainty in terms of when really are we going to overcome the whole situation. As the Governor will articulate, the COVID-19 developments have weighed down heavily on the domestic, regional and global growth outlook. Domestically, the country is battling with different challenges, including the unfavorable fiscal position and the negative growth outlook for 2020. As such, the time is upon us all to unite against these challenges as we craft our way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we as a bank, like all central banks world over, are expected to communicate to the outcomes of our monetary policy decisions clearly and in a manner that not only helps our stakeholders understand our cause of action, but also allow you to become our policy agents in driving the monetary policies that we set for the kingdom. Program Director, I am happy to indicate that in his speech, the Governor will outline the various measures that the bank has employed to cushion the economy against the negative effects of COVID-19. However, it is worth not mentioning that Monetary policy alone cannot address all the problems emanating from the COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, all stakeholders should continue to play their roles effectively for the country to win this battle. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, may I take this opportunity on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Central Bank, management and staff to welcome you all to the Governor's Annual Monetary Policy Statement. I hope we will have fruitful deliberations from which, as a bank, we shall take learning, assess ourselves and take suggestions into the year 2020-2021. With these few remarks, allow me to call upon the Governor to take the podium and make his presentation and give a detailed account of what transpired in the year. I thank you.
Thank you, AG. Program Director, thank you. Colleagues all here, with your permission, can I just put this on the side? Otherwise, you won't hear a word from me. But also make sure you stay away from me so that you don't give me your COVID-19. Thank you. Program Director, Honorable Minister of Finance, members of both Houses of Parliament that are present here this morning, the Board of Directors of the Central Bank of Eswatini, members of the Monetary Policy Consultative Committee, the CEOs of our commercial banks and financial institutions and non-bank financial institutions, CEOs of the private sector and public enterprises, representatives of international organizations, representatives of the academic institutions, senior government officials, central bank management and staff, media representatives, honorable ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to this year's annual monetary policy address. I must mention from the onset that I have a very long address here and only realized this morning that I've only been given half an hour. What I have is for 2 hours. So we'll see how we marry these two. The theme of this address this morning is ensuring price and financial stability to support economic growth in times of COVID-19. The presentation is being held under an environment where the prevalence of the coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic plagues the global community, forcing us to conduct business differently. Developments in information and communication technology have made it possible for me to address you through this forum. My appreciation also goes to you, ladies and gentlemen, for making time to be part of this address, regardless of your busy schedules. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, first I'd like to thank the bank's stakeholders who continuously support the bank's activities and hence assist the bank in achieving its monetary policy objective. It is my pleasure to announce that the bank has not